curious minds and humble hearts and a bit of jazz, let us seek the way of God. And this prayer, please stand if you are able. Let us pray. O God, we give you thanks for your Holy Spirit plummeting into our lives like a gannet, white wings cleaving the gray waves, disturbing, delighting, and defying death. Amen. Please say hello to those you're seated near or standing near.
And the kids can meet their teachers in the back to head to Sunday school. Friends, thank you for joining us. Hope the kids heard the message to meet up with Mrs. Stevenson and Mrs. Cook in the back for Roots and Wings Sunday School. For the rest who are here, we are delighted that you have joined us on a beautiful Sunday fall morning. And we especially welcome those of you who are guests or visitors or with us for the first time. If you'd like to leave your name and address on the back table, your email address that is, it'll allow us a chance to send some stuff your way and let you know what we have going on in the weeks and months ahead. We will be here until the middle of May when we head back to the beach in Lake Bluff. We also hope you'll join us for coffee hour, which is in Reed Hall right next door, and that's following the service. There's coffee and treats and things like that. Please join me in offering a welcome to Hunter Prendergast and the band this morning. You probably have a pretty good sense looking at the equipment up here that it's no small project to be here and play early on a Sunday morning. And they arrive early and then stay to take everything down for a while afterwards. So we thank you not only for your wonderful music, but also for your time and energy in making this all happen. Next week, I will preach, and we'll have a gentleman who's provided a concert for us once in the past, a touring musician, Pierce Pettis, will be here. You can find information on him online after the service if you'd like. Extraordinary musician, that's next Sunday. And now, to continue our worship, we are beginning the annual fund. It's a 4-week time in our church when we try and raise commitment and gifts and support for the coming year. And we always have someone or a couple from the congregation speak. And this morning we have, looks like Aaron and Lauren Toll and their family to offer a word or two.
Hi everybody, I'm Lauren Toll. This is my husband Aaron. This is baby Walker, he's 2 months. And what's your name? Grace. Grace is 2.5. We are really excited to be up here to talk about why we are members of the church. But both of our children have been baptized at the beach. Grace by Tom and Walker by Zach. Gosh, just less than a month ago. When you were a baby, you were baptized, yeah. But a little about Aaron and I, we are come from really interesting religious backgrounds. I grew up in what I like to refer to as Catholic light in an Episcopalian church. And Aaron grew up going to ditching Sunday school at the occasional Unitarian Universalist service. So as you can imagine, almost complete opposite spectrums of the religious background. But for us, we've been here about 4 years now. Has it been 4 years?
Yeah,
maybe a little more.
4 years.
Yeah, and we moved here and had begun our search for a congregation because we felt a spiritual outlet for our kids would be important to us to let them choose and know that there's something bigger out there. So we started our first at the community church and didn't go anywhere else after that because we just loved it so much. So I'm going to let Aaron continue talking from here.
Sure. We've only been here for about 4 years, attending for about 4 years, but I've known Tom for almost 2 decades as the chaplain of the Lake Bluff Fire Department, of which I'm a member. And we've really been blessed to get to know Zach and his family and really consider them great friends at this point. And many of you we've also come to know and really good friendships as well. So when we were asked to come up and talk about why we attend, why we contribute to the annual fund, did a little bit of reflecting and asked ourselves, why? Why is it that this place is so special to us? Is it the spiritual message that we're entertained with by Tom and Zach each week? Definitely part of it. Is it the music program that Ken puts together for us? I mean, that's just absolutely incredible. The free childcare, obviously, is for us to attend meditation and services without interruption. But also it's these sacred spaces. In fact, when I was growing up, I actually did drum circles with my dad back on the stage back there. He was a professor here at Lake Forest College. And so this place is sacred, and of course the beach growing up in town. Lifeguarding there when I was in high school and college, and just an amazing place. But it's also is it the feeling of acceptance. But it's not just acceptance, it's an encouragement of having different spiritual views, different needs, different perspectives. But the reality is it's not, that the community church isn't just a church. It's a book club, it's a social organization, it's a Rib Fest team, although we did lose to you this year. I wasn't on the team, I was on another team, so I'm a little bitter. But it's so much more than just a church. But the bottom line is, our Sundays are better by coming here. Our weeks are better by coming here. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Thank you.
I often have said that Sunday morning, a chapel like this is filled with people, and the one thing that everyone here has in common is everybody's fighting a battle of one kind or another. We may know about it, we may not. It may be tiny, it may be huge, but every one of us struggles, and at times we really suffer. And the Bible is filled with stories of people who suffered. Here is just one from Psalm 102. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come to thee. Do not hide thy face from me in the day of my distress. Incline thy ear to me and answer me speedily in the day when I call. For my days pass away like smoke, and my bones burn like a furnace. My heart is smitten like grass and withered. I forget to eat my bread. Because of my loud groaning, my bones cleave to my flesh. I am like an owl of the waste places, a vulture of the wilderness. I lie awake. I'm like a lonely bird on a housetop. All the days my enemies taunt me, and those who deride me use my name for a curse. For I eat ashes like bread and mingle tears with my drink. Because of thy indignation and anger, for thou hast taken me up and thrown me away. My days are like an evening shadow. I wither away like grass. The time, about 2,500 years ago, the place, the dramatic foothills of the Himalayas in what we now call Nepal. There a king lived in a great palace where he and the queen were blessed with a son for whom they held a vision to lead a flawless, picture-perfect life. That kind of life meant first that his every desire and wish would be met, and second, that he would never, ever suffer. So the king had huge walls built around the palace, so the young prince would have those needs met, and that he'd never see or experience any of the troubles of the outside world. That's how he lived his life, at least until he became an adolescent. What happens when you become an adolescent? Well, for many, it's a time of R&R, not rest and relaxation, but instead, rebellion and rejection. And that's just what the prince did, which on one hand is very understandable because everything had been given to him. None of it really meant anything. So one night in his rebellious adolescence, the prince snuck out of the palace. He did it to gain a glimpse and a taste of life beyond those walls. And as he wandered through the village, he was absolutely dumbfounded in what he saw. Broken down elderly, struggling through the final stages of their lives. Poor, who called the street their home. He witnessed beggars desperate for food, and people who had lost their minds, waiting endlessly in a sea of confusion. As Mark Manson writes in his bestseller, which has a title, I Can't Give You in Church on Sunday Morning, the prince found himself in an existential crisis. He had never, ever been given the tools to process challenge and difficulty and pain. He had no idea what he would do or how he could process what he just witnessed. And so he did the only thing he could think to do, which was to escape, to run away. But he did far more than just leave the palace. As a child who'd only grown up knowing extremes, he did something extreme himself. He didn't just run away, but he also renounced his royal position and family, and he gave up all his possessions. And after that, he lived in the streets like a dog, sleeping in the dirt, begging for scraps of food from strangers. The prince's life was a free fall from the pinnacle to a pit. After life insulated from even the slightest challenge, he now suffered every minute of every day from disease and pain and hunger and loneliness. Some days his only nourishment was a single nut. Well, time went by as it always does. A year, a few years, a number of years, when finally the prince had an aha moment and recognized the life of suffering brought him no insight. And in his pain and lack, the mystery of the world was not any further revealed than when he had been the prince who'd had everything. Maybe his only real lesson, which is hopefully one that you and I already know. Having everything, but doing nothing for it, means that everything is really worth nothing. And having nothing, but without reason or meaningful sacrifice, it's still only nothing. The value of what you and I have, or what we do not have, is in direct relation to how much of ourselves is invested. Lesson number 1, no investment, no return. And so the prince realized that his grand idea of noble poverty was every bit as crazy an idea as his father's grand vision of a perfect life with no troubles. Yet as his father's son, he was still wired for grand ideas. And so the prince went from poverty saying to himself, I know what I'll do now. I'm going to sit by that giant tree. I'm going to sit under it, that tree by the river, and I'm not going to get up until I've figured out the meaning of life. And so he sat by the tree during the day, and he sat by the tree at night, and he sat there in darkness, and he sat there in light, and after 49 days, finally came insight. And lesson number 2, we all suffer no matter what. To live is to suffer. As Manson puts it, the rich suffer because of their abundance. Look at all they have. Look at all they have to lose and what it takes to keep track of it. And the poor suffer because of their lack. Can you imagine what it would be like to not have any idea where your next meal would come from? And people who have no family suffer because they have no family. It's pretty tough to be a soloist when everybody else is singing in a duo or a trio or a quartet or a choir. But it's pretty tough to be in a family too. And those of you who have families know that's the story. Who doesn't? Have a wacky uncle or a crazy cousin always mixing things up. And this realization of the prince, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, that we all suffer and that pain and loss in life are inevitable, became the central tenet of the Buddhist philosophy. And in reality, if you read the Bible, it's not a lot different in the Christian tradition. The Bible is a story of people suffering all throughout history. Consider the Old Testament. It documents time and again the adversity and hardship of the Hebrew people. From Abram and Sarah, for decades desperate to have a child, to the consuming plagues of locusts and boils and frogs and lice and darkness, to Job who suffered through testing both by God as well as by his dearest friends, to the psalmist whom I quoted a few moments ago, I lie awake. I am like a lonely bird on a housetop. My days are like an evening shadow. I am withered like grass. The New Testament? It ultimately addresses suffering by pointing to the cross and saying, yes, there is suffering. And then pointing to the tomb, the empty tomb, and saying, but suffering doesn't last, and neither does it have the last word. To be human is to suffer. Suffering is our life companion from beginning to end, from our slippery struggle from the womb to drawing our final breath. Yet unlike the prince who suffered through abject poverty for years and concluded that his suffering brought him no real insight beyond its reality, it seems to me that to survive is to make sense of suffering. Recently, amidst all too frequent clouds of suffering that have darkened the days of many of you and others in this church and community, I've wondered to myself, well, what are the lessons that come to us in our suffering in the year 2018? What sense can we make of it these times when we are desperately struggling just to stay afloat? So I read, and I talked to many of you, and I prayed, though I'm sure not nearly enough, endeavoring to somehow sniff out the sweet aroma of wisdom hidden in the stench of our suffering. And some of you with whom I spoke seemed to say, Tom, you know, suffering is a choice. Suffering is when we experience pain and then we extend its life. You know, we can make the choice not to suffer. There's a side to me that love that, because my glass is way half full. By nature, I'm a positivist. And I chewed on that a bit, and I got psyched up at the notion of a philosophy empowering us to reduce or limit or banish our suffering. And that initial hit of pain, after that we can choose not to suffer. But then I thought about, in particular, one friend, a dear friend, no longer with us, who served multiple tours in Vietnam. And that, for lack of a better word, demons remained with him throughout his life. Demons he tried to drown out with alcohol, and he pretty effectively did that, but he drowned himself in the process. Sure, he had choices, I suppose, but letting go of the horrific scenes from his past, from his service in Vietnam, and letting go of alcohol were not so easy as just flipping a switch to say, well, I'm not going to suffer anymore. Or the picture I saw in the paper of a Syrian child in a camp, uncertain where her next meal would come from. Or the parents of my classmate in high school, Karen, who disappeared for 3 years. And every night, I am sure, her parents cried a river of tears. You don't make a choice to flip the switch on suffering in times like those. Or the friend whose back pain is chronic, and you know there's not a position in the world that she can get in to ease that pain. And she can take drugs. But as she loses her back pain, she loses her mind. So there are times when we can make a choice not to suffer, like when we worry excessively about things we can't change or impact. But we don't always have the tools or the capacity or the ability or the resources to escape the shackles of our suffering. But like dreams that sometimes give us insight that guides us, in our times of suffering, there are gifts sort of like pilot fish that accompany our suffering. Gift one, suffering gives us information. When something's not working and we suffer, whether it's a pounding headache that will not cease, or we're suffering from a broken heart that it keeps us awake at night, and then we're like zombies during the day because of it. When we suffer, it's our body, our minds telling us that we need to take action. In short, as Manson writes, pain and suffering teach us. Gift number 2, happiness comes from solving the problems underneath our suffering. Consider this scenario. Your child, as they begin adolescence, descends into a very, very dark place. You don't know what to do. And so you start throwing stuff up against the wall, trying to provide them with every resource, every tool you possibly can to help them climb out of this dark place. And you don't give up no matter what you do. And then after time, a number of months, even beyond a year, probably because of a combination of factors, who can point to just one, but for some reason they climb out of that dark place. And they start to live in the light of day again. And you know what? You've never had a more joyful moment in your life than seeing this child come back to life again and step out of that suffering. Think back to the greatest and most joyful moments of your lives. I bet for many, it's come through solving a problem. It's the foundation of suffering. 2 other gifts. Gift number 3, our suffering gives us perspective and a new way of seeing life. In our struggling and suffering, we have a new lens. I remember a friend of mine whose name is Jeff. I've not now seen him for many years. He was a friend when I was young. Then in his early 20s, he was part of a terrible car accident. Left him in a wheelchair for the remainder of his life. Well, I caught up with Jeff about 20 years ago after not having seen him. And he talked a bit about his suffering and his struggle, about his disappointment. He was on track to be kind of an academic rock star, to get his PhD and spend his life teaching. Well, the rug was pulled out from underneath him. That was never going to happen now. But what happened in the process is he gained a new way of seeing his life. And as he kind of explained it to me, he wasn't so focused always on what's down the road or what's in the future or what's next or what he could become. He was focused from that point on in the present moment and enjoying a song, enjoying time with a friend, enjoying the beauty of nature. Finally, gift number 4, it's the role that gratitude plays in suffering. Kobayashi Issa was a haiku master in Japan in the 18th century who wrote, "The world of dew, D-E-W, the world of dew is a world of dew." I suppose what he's saying is like what we say when we're in a moment of exasperation and we say, "Oh, whatever," or "It is what it is." Yet after Issa writes, "The world of dew is a world of dew," he follows with a very hopeful ... and yet. And knowing Issa's life work and what makes this all interesting is he is clearly saying, yes, absolutely bad stuff happens, and every one of us suffers in our lives. But in our travails and in our anguish, a place remains for gratitude that helps carry us through our moments of suffering. You see, gratitude amidst suffering wasn't just the central theme of his poetry, it was a central theme of his life. Issa saw his mother die when he was 2. Then after he was married, his first son died. Then his father contracted typhoid fever. His next son and then a beloved daughter died. Then his 1-year-old daughter contracted smallpox. She died, another son died, and then he became paralyzed. Then his wife died while giving birth to another child who died soon thereafter. And then he was married again, but separated within a few weeks. He married a third time, and his house was destroyed by fire. Finally, his third wife bore him a healthy daughter, but Esau himself died at 64 before he could see her born. You read Esau's poems, which until his death consistently express gratitude for the beauty and the gift of life, despite struggles, despite suffering. Consciously embracing gratitude in the face of despair is a horse we ride that helps keep us going amidst our suffering. So, friends, if you're human, you have suffered. If you're human, you and I will suffer again. That's just life. But to be fully human also means to not give up. And to dare believe, to have the courage to believe that we can do something about our suffering, no matter the source or the intensity or our agony. And that's where prayer and that's where openness to the Spirit enter the picture. Prayer and openness to the Spirit that don't necessarily change our suffering, but they do change us. Amen. Go in peace. And the people said,
Thank you.